So it's been a diplomatic roller coaster since Donald Trump got elected back to the White House for his second term. He's made his diplomatic priorities very clear. He wants to put a quick end to the Russia-Ukraine war. He wants to make Gaza into a Riviera. And of course, there is the looming threat of tariffs, the Trump tariffs on every major trading partner of the United States. How does the world deal with this? Joining me now is Fareed Zakaria, the host of GPS on CNN. Thank you very much, Fareed, for joining us here on CNN News 18. I know you've been a student of foreign policy, of international relations. You've been a scholar of international relations. Have you seen anything like we saw on the 28th of February, that Friday morning at the Oval Office between Trump, Vance, and Zelensky? Have you seen anything like this in the 30 years that you've been covering foreign policy?
No, Zach, I haven't. I don't think many people have seen it in 40, 50, 60 years. And what was striking about it was both the style and the substance. The style of taking, what are clearly private disagreements and differences that historically have been done privately. There was always the joke that people would come out of a big fight and they would meet with the president and say we had a free and frank conversation. Well, we saw the free and frank conversation on live TV as if we were, flies on the wall in a private meeting. It was extraordinary. And the way in which Trump and Vance ganged up on an ally of the United States was really unprecedented. So then we get to the substance. What that meeting represented was the United States effectively turning its back on an ally that, remember, it has promised to secure for 30 years now. In 1994, Ukraine gave up what was then the third largest nuclear arsenal in the world. It gave it to Russia, and in return for which it asked for guarantees on its security and sovereignty, which was signed by Russia, Britain, and the United States. So this is not, a recent friend or ally. The United States has been supporting Ukraine's sovereignty ever since really its founding, its modern founding. And for that to transform, so there's the style of how Trump handles Zelensky, but there's the substance of what he was effectively doing. Both are unprecedented.
I want to expand this now to the very future of NATO itself, because this is a fundamental rupture in the longest standing transatlantic alliance between the way the United States sees the future of Europe and the future of Ukraine, and how Europe sees the future of Europe. Do you think, like Trump's allies like Musk have been saying openly, that America should pull out of NATO? Do you think Trump will pull out the 100,000 troops, American troops who are there in Europe? What may this mean for the future of NATO?
Well, it's again unprecedented, and you're right. NATO is not just NATO is the oldest and most successful alliance in history. There's nothing even that comes close. It has kept the peace now. It has prevented a major world war for 80 years, longest period of great power peace, longest period of global prosperity. And you're right. There are many people in Trump's movement who believe the United States should withdraw from NATO, withdraw from the United Nations. That was also one of the things Musk endorsed. So nobody quite knows where this goes, but Trump has never said that. Trump has always simply talked about getting the NATO countries to spend more on their defense, which is a worthwhile goal. My guess is that the alliance, if it survives, has to be transformed. Europe will have to become a much, much bigger part of the alliance. And with that will come much greater degree of European autonomy from the United States. And so the alliance will, in a sense, get weakened because it will not speak with one voice. It will not have one clear leader. I mean, that's long in the future. But if the Europeans do, in fact, become equal partners to the Americans in terms of defense spending and capability, that'll mean a more equal partnership than the one that currently exists. So in a very strange way, Trump is making Europe great again.
I want to talk about another area where clearly, again, Trump wants to upend all the established rules, which is in trade. He's already imposed tariffs on Canada and Mexico. He's paused a great number of them. He's imposed tariffs on China. There are retaliatory tariffs from those countries as well. And starting April 2nd, he is threatening reciprocal tariffs with every single major trading partner of the United States, including India. How does India navigate this?
I think that I think that it is highly likely that some version of what he's describing happens. He's said it too many times to simply withdraw. Now, reciprocal tariffs can mean many things. It can mean generalized tariffs on the country based on your average tariff. It could mean in each sector. Um, it could mean even more detailed than that. And nobody is quite sure what Trump means because it's a vague threat. Doing it on every sector would be incredibly complicated. So one assumes it's some more general tariff. Presumably, this is all a negotiating tactic to then get better terms. So what India should really try to do is to say to Trump, okay, we understand that you're going to put these tariffs on. Now let's talk about what do we have to do to have these tariffs taken off. And Trump will presumably make a series of demands. I think India is well positioned in this struggle because India has lots of low hanging fruit that it can pluck. India and Brazil are the two most protectionist large economies in the world. India is incredibly protectionist. I mean, most people in India might be surprised to learn that, but China is much, much more open to foreign trade and foreign investment and all those kinds of things than India is. So India could give a lot, which would actually be good for India. It would create productivity, it would create growth, it would spur greater efficiency, it would lower costs for consumers. There are all kinds of benefits that would come from this. And it could at the same time seem to be agreeing to a Donald Trump demand and allowing him to declare victory, which is, the theatrics of this are as important to Trump as the substance. So I think India is in a very unique position to be able to actually cut a deal, bilateral trade deal that reduces the Trump reciprocal tariffs, in return modernizes the Indian trade system.
So tell me, again, I want to go down the line with where Trump is going with these threat of these tariffs. Is his ultimate aim to try and lower the tariffs, get, as he describes, a more level playing field with all of these countries, including India? And is he looking at bilateral trade deals with all of these countries? And if that is the case, what happens to the existing trading framework, the global trading framework under the WTO? I mean, is it pretty much, dead in the water?
Yeah, I think the WTO is largely dead. And I think Trump really does not believe in that kind of, that, was at the heart of the kind of open international order. And Trump is a critic of it. He thinks that the United States has not benefited from it. I realize that this will seem strange to people in India, really anywhere else in the world, where you look at the United States and say this is the most powerful country in the history of the world. What are they talking about? But Trump truly believes that the last several decades, 50 years, 60 years of free trade has been terrible for America. I don't know where he thinks America would be if it had been. I mean, America is already number one in almost by every measure of international economics, but he believes that America has been ripped off. So I suspect it will all be bilateral deals. I think that the WTO had problems anyway. It was badly set up for. I mean, you have a one country, one vote system, which sounds good, but it's a recipe for paralysis. It means Liberia has an equal weight and vote in the system as the United States or China. The appellate court system is stopped working partly because of America, but in general, the whole thing wasn't very well conceived. What I hoped would happen is that the United States would lead in the reform of the WTO and creating a more efficient and more effective one, which, by the way, China might have been willing to participate in. But I think much more likely is that Trump will simply abandon it and pursue a series of bilateral deals.
All right, and final word, Fareed. So in the almost 50 days that he's been in office in the second term, and I want you to separate this in three buckets, right? International affairs, trade, and domestic. I think domestic is largely around this cuts that him and Musk are making to various government departments, in these three buckets, what do you think Trump really is? What's like the number one priority in these three buckets for him? Presumably, this is his last term, unless he changes the Constitution. I don't know. With him, you can never say. But by law, he's not allowed to run again. So what does he want to leave behind with in these three buckets?
It's a very good question. I think that the heart of Trump's own worldview is very much this protectionism. So I think he will want to essentially have, in some way or the other, crippled the world trading system and made it much more protectionist, mercantilist. I think average tariffs will rise around the world, even though, as I say, in India's case, they may come down. But I think, in the industrialized world, tariffs at 3%. I could easily see them going up to 5-6%, or doubling of tariffs, which is bad for everyone, bad for India, because the price of everything goes up. I think he's also somebody who wants a much less globalist, cosmopolitan world. So immigration restrictions, immigration reforms of various kinds. I wouldn't be surprised if you see more happen on the H-1B, all that kind of thing, even though he has temporarily given Musk a reprieve on it. The heart of his program is very anti-immigration. And I think that on the domestic side, what matters most to him is, I think, the sense that he had a dramatic effect and an impact. So, I don't think this was his great ideology, but the deconstruction of the administrative state, savage cuts everywhere, I think are very important. That's going to be, that's what he's going to try to do. The federal government in the United States is not that big anyway. It's one of the lowest per capita number of federal bureaucrats compared to the population, certainly compared to the GDP. But again, it's one of the obsessions of the MAGA right. I think there will be an attempt to assert American power and the presidential power, particularly domestically, as opposed to Congress, as opposed to even the courts. There's a very big thrust, which is deeply worrying because it's anti-democratic in some ways. So that's the package. The thing I'm most sad about, back to the first set of things, is the absolutely savage cuts to international aid, to foreign aid. 83% of all foreign aid is now going to be cut. I was always very proud as an Indian American that the United States was the richest country in the world, in the history of the world. It was also the most generous in the history of the world. 4 out of every $10 of humanitarian aid worldwide came from one source, the United States federal government. But that is now in the past. And, all the kinds of programs that helped so many countries and so many millions of people in India escape disease, escape poverty. All those programs are being either savagely cut or shuttered entirely. And it's a very sad thing. It changes the image of America in the world, I think.
All right, Fareed Zakaria, we'll leave it at that. Thank you very much for joining us here on CNN News 18 with your thoughts and perspective. Thank you.